Your life was decided before you were born. Not by your choices, not by your effort, not even by your own actions. By your grandfathers, maybe your great-grandfathers. Someone you never met made a decision in 1950, and now, 75 years later, you're living with the consequences. This is Songbun, North Korea's hereditary caste system, and it determines everything. Where you live, what you eat, whether your children will ever see a doctor, whether you'll freeze to death this winter. 25 million people sorted into categories like products on a shelf, and most of them don't even know which category they're in. The system divides everyone into three main groups: hostile, wavering, and core. But within those groups, there are 50 sub-classifications tracked in a government database called Faithful Servant 2.0. Every citizen over 17 has a file. Every action updates it. Every relative's mistake stains it. The regime built this system between 1957 and 1960 as Kim Il-sung consolidated power, categorizing citizens based on what their ancestors did during the Japanese occupation and the Korean War. If your grandfather fought the Japanese alongside Kim Il-sung, you're golden. If he owned land, practiced Christianity, or fought for the South, your family is marked for generations. Here's what makes it particularly cruel. You're never told your classification. Children grow up not knowing why certain doors stay closed, why their family lives where they do, why their father works in a mine, while their neighbour's father works in an office. They just know some invisible force shapes everything and there's nothing they can do about it. Let's start at the bottom. The hostile class makes up 27% of the population, roughly 3.2 million people. Your great-grandfather was a landlord, or a merchant, or a lawyer, or he went to church, or he helped South Korean forces during the war, even if that help was forced. Doesn't matter. His crime lives in your blood, passed down like a genetic disorder. The government relocated most hostile class families to the impoverished northeastern provinces decades ago. You live in isolated mountain villages where the soil is rocky and winters are brutal. You work on collective farms or in coal mines 16-hour days, 7 days a week. The regime assigns your job. You don't get to choose. No one from your class gets to choose anything. Your food rations are smaller than everyone else's. During the famine of the 1990s, when up to 2.5 million North Koreans starved to death, Songbun determined who ate and who didn't. You were at the back of the line. When the rations ran out, they ran out for you first. People in your village boiled tree bark and grass. They caught rats and considered themselves lucky. Children develop that hollow-eyed look that comes from chronic malnutrition, their growth stunted, their bodies permanently damaged. A family was exiled to Mangsan County in February 2025, transported in an open truck in minus 20 degrees Celsius weather. Their crime? Ancestors who supposedly collaborated with the South during the war. Plus, they were caught distributing South Korean dramas. 3 generations punished for one person's mistake. That's the rule. If you commit a serious political crime, your parents, your children, and your grandchildren all go to the camps. The ones who are born there die there. You keep your head down. You work until your body gives out. You hope that maybe in 100 years your descendants will be allowed to be human. The wavering class sits in the middle, comprising 45% of the population. You're not trusted, but you're not eliminated either. Maybe your family had relatives who fled to South Korea. Maybe your father was an intellectual who asked uncomfortable questions once. Maybe your grandmother's family were small-time merchants. The state isn't sure about you, so they watch. You can work in a factory or become a teacher or a nurse, but only in smaller cities. Pyongyang is off-limits. The capital is reserved for the core class, the trusted ones. You'll never see it. You'll never travel abroad. You'll never know what's written in your file, the one that sits in a government office somewhere, filled with reports from informers and assessments of your ideological reliability. Your rations are adequate when times are good. You have electricity a few hours a day, maybe. You have a small apartment with mandatory portraits of the supreme leader that must stay spotlessly clean. Dust on the leader's face is a political crime. The Neighborhood Watch Committee knows when you come home, who visits you, how many bowls you own. They count everything. Once a week, there are self-criticism sessions. You stand in front of your neighbours and confess your ideological shortcomings. You didn't study hard enough. You were late to work. You had a selfish thought. Everyone confesses something because the ones who confess nothing are suspicious. And the ones who confess too much are also suspicious. You must confess exactly the right amount. It's a performance everyone's learned by heart. But here's where it gets interesting. Money is starting to matter more than bloodline for the wavering class. Since 2002, when the government allowed limited private enterprise, a new class has emerged, the Donju, or Masters of Money. They're not party members. They don't have revolutionary bloodlines, but they have cash, and cash opens doors that Songbun keeps locked. The Donju operate in a grey zone, running businesses and trading goods in exchange for bribing officials. You can't buy better Songbun, but you can buy its effects. University places for your children, better apartments, medical care, immunity from prosecution. One defector named Choi watched his parents build a fuel business selling to truck drivers and the military. Suddenly, officials who would never have spoken to their family were taking meetings, accepting payments, making problems disappear. This shift reveals something crucial about the system. It's not as rigid as it pretends to be. Corruption flows through every level now, greasing the gears of a machine that would otherwise grind to a halt. The core class, 28% of the population, watches this evolution with mixed feelings. They have revolutionary credentials. Their grandfathers fought the Japanese occupation, marched with Kim Il-sung, earned their place through blood and loyalty. That legacy grants them access to Pyongyang, university education, party membership, decent apartments with working electricity. They're supposed to be the trusted ones. But trust is relative when the state files on every citizen above 17 are now managed through software called Faithful Servant 2.0. Any official with the right access can pull up your entire history from any terminal in the country. The core class lives well compared to everyone else, but comfort breeds its own paranoia. They have televisions that receive only state channels, refrigerators that work when power permits, bicycles they needed permits to own. Their children attend elite schools and learn languages, sciences, proper ideological formation. They dine at Pyongyang's restaurants where Korean barbecue costs what a factory worker makes in months. Some neighborhoods in the capital, like Mansudae, are nicknamed Pyonghatan, where apartments with modern conveniences sell illegally for up to $250,000. Yet even here, everyone performs. Party members comprise 10% of the population, and joining requires years of proving yourself through voluntary labour, memorising the teachings of 3 generations of Kims, getting recommendations from existing members who vouch for your loyalty. Once you're in, special stores open up where imported fruit and real coffee and chocolate appear on shelves. But membership demands constant participation, weekly meetings, salary contributions, political campaigns, recruiting others, guiding their ideological development, and reporting. Always reporting. If your neighbour questions the regime and you don't tell someone, you become complicit when someone else inevitably does. The entire system survives because no one trusts anyone. Not co-workers, not neighbours, not spouses. Marriage is partnership, but loyalty to the party comes first. Local cadres manage this web of suspicion directly. They run factories, oversee districts of thousands, manage agricultural production for entire counties. Real power, real responsibility, real danger. Everything in their jurisdiction is their fault. Production shortfalls, unrest, defections, floods, droughts, disease. You cannot blame workers or weather or the system itself because the system is perfect. Only people fail. The Supreme Leader's guidance is flawless. Only your implementation lacks. So, everyone cooks the books. You report higher production than you achieved. You hide problems and cover accidents. Truth means losing everything. Your apartment, party membership, access to special stores, family status. Being sent down means becoming wavering class or worse. The lies stack upon lies. Central committees receive reports of record harvests while villagers starve. The Supreme Leader probably knows, but lies are structural now, necessary for the machine to function. Pyongyang's elite represent the pinnacle of this pyramid. 3 million people allowed in the capital while everyone else needs special permission to enter. Checkpoints guard every road. The city looks almost modern with its skyscrapers and boulevards, cars and shops with actual products, restaurants and theatres. Foreigners who visit see only this facade. They don't see the northeastern villages. The elite have reliable electricity most of the time, hot water, access to carefully selected foreign films showing Western decadence. Some own cars, status symbols broadcasting importance. But surveillance intensifies at this altitude. Every building has embedded informers. Every office has listeners. Phones are tapped. Conversations monitored. Secret police walk streets in plain clothes watching for disloyalty. One wrong word, one suspicious friendship, one relative who defected destroys you. The higher you climb, the farther you fall. Military generals wear uniforms heavy with medals, some earned through decades of service, others given because the Supreme Leader liked their face or appreciated their applause enthusiasm. They command thousands officially, millions on paper. The Korean People's Army is among the world's largest, but its soldiers are malnourished teenagers fainting during parade rehearsals. Equipment hasn't been updated since the 1980s. Tanks sit immobile without fuel. Aircraft stay grounded. Navy vessels rust in port. It doesn't matter. Their job isn't fighting real wars, but threatening them. Generals stand behind the Supreme Leader at parades, take notes during speeches they'll never read, clap exactly as long as everyone else. Never longer, never shorter. They're props, symbols, but they also control shadow economies through military-run factories, mines, construction projects. They skim from these operations. Everyone does. They live in villas with servants, drink scotch, smoke Cuban cigars, drive Mercedes. Yet other generals are always watching. The Supreme Leader rotates commanders constantly, never letting anyone build troop loyalty. He promotes and demotes unpredictably, executes generals who become too popular or ambitious or comfortable. You must be loyal, but not ambitious, visible, but not prominent, competent, but not threatening. Many fail. Those who work closest to Kim Jong-un himself in party headquarters or the National Defense Commission or the Organization and Guidance Department see classified documents that would get ordinary. CIRI citizens executed for knowing they exist. They know about famines officially denied, purges that erased thousands from photographs and existence, the nuclear program, the economy held together with foreign aid and illegal weapons sales and cyber theft and crystal meth exports. They attend meetings with Kim, standing against walls while he speaks, agreeing with everything, laughing at jokes, applauding insights. They never offer opinions unless asked, and when asked, they give the answer he wants. They've watched what happens otherwise. A vice minister once suggested a minor policy adjustment and was executed with an anti-aircraft gun in front of 100 officials, his body literally torn apart. The message was unmistakable. At the very top sits Kim Jong-un, barely 40, ruling until death, because there is no retirement, no escape. His face hangs in every building. His words are scripture, his decisions divine law. He has nuclear weapons, absolute power over life and death, palaces scattered nationwide, yachts, private islands, a bulletproof train. He imports luxury cars and cognac while his people eat bark. And he is utterly alone, trusting no one. Everyone wants something. Every smile calculates survival. He wonders if any of it is real, if he is real, or just playing a role written before his birth. Somewhere in the mountains right now, a child is being born. The state will assign them a number in the Songbun system. Their entire life will be determined before their first breath. They will worship Kim until they die, never knowing he is just as trapped as they are, just in a bigger cage. The cycle continues, generation after generation, a system built on fear and hunger and lies and nuclear weapons. 25 million people locked in their assigned places, most never knowing why, never understanding that an ancestor they never met made a choice or had a choice made for them that sealed their family's fate forever. The Songbun system doesn't just control lives. It controls futures, plural, stretching forward into decades your grandchildren haven't lived yet. And the cruelest part? The ones at the very top, the ones with all the power and palaces and nuclear arsenals, they're prisoners too. Different cells, better meals, but still trapped in a performance they can never escape. Kim Jong-un cannot step down. The hostile class cannot climb up. The wavering class cannot stop wavering. Everyone, from the starving farmer in the mountains to the supreme leader in his compound, is playing a role assigned before they were born in a system that demands they play it until they die. That's what absolute control looks like. Not freedom for anyone, just different sizes of cages.